Hi, everybody, and welcome back. Today we have with us Michelle Oravitz.
Thank you so much, Dr. Christina, for having me on.
Thank you so much for coming. Everyone, today is such a cool topic because we are going to talk about mindset and visualization and how that can assist on your journey. Michelle, tell us a bit about yourself and your background.
Of course. I used to be local to where you are now. I used to work in New York City. My background or my previous life, I was an architect and worked in corporate America and had irregular periods for about like 13 years and was going back and forth to many different doctors who gave me the birth control pill. And we've heard this story before. So I knew at that point, I was like, I'm not really getting the solution that I came here for. And I remember my grandmother always talking to me about like eating healthy, not ever, she hated going to the doctor. She was all about like eating healthy and like natural remedies and herbs. And so I was always intrigued. And I think that like now looking back, she awakened a little spark in me. And around that same time, I read a book that was life-changing, which is called The Power of the Subconscious Mind by Joseph Murphy. And I
Mm.
started writing affirmations, and a month later met my husband. And it was just like everything started falling into place. I felt like energetically with my chi, everything started to align. And then I was like, okay, I'm not in the right place of work. Basically, moved to Florida, I did a 2-year training in Ayurvedic medicine, and then paused for a little while, had my kids, raised them, and then once they got to a certain age, went back to school for acupuncture. And then after that, started my business, and then I went back to school or back to study hypnotherapy just because the mind was it's just so intriguing to me how our power of belief can really impact so much. And I know this personally because after reading that book by Joseph Murphy, I started writing affirmations, and it was like I triggered something or kind of a connection with attracting things that I wanted and knew how to start doing that. And I started realizing that actually before reading the book. And I was like, okay, so there's something about like the attitude and the energy that you put out and what comes back at you.
Absolutely. So I want to read this book. This sounds really cool. I've been doing Deepak Chopra's 21 Days of Abundance, and
Love
I
it.
have a mantra that I recite, like an abundance mantra. And in the case of the, women and couples that are listening to this podcast, could you be attracting a baby? So I want to hear from you, in this magic. Like, so you were reading this book, you started doing affirmations. Like, tell us what started coming to you. Like, what were you saying, or what were your affirmations, and what was coming to you, and how long did it take? All that.
So many things. I can't even think about how many. I remember like I started a new job in New York City, and right before starting it, that's when I was reading the book. And I remember thinking, oh, I don't want to go to New York City because I know that I'm going to be like stuck in this cubicle without any light. And I was like, okay, let me change that. I'm going to have natural light wherever I work. And it was just like kind of in my mind, this is how it's going to be. I literally get a job, and where am I? On the top floor where I have skylights
Mhm.
as my window. And the whole place was so filled with natural light. And I loved the job because I love the people. And it was a great place where I met so many people that I actually am still in touch with, some of them. And it was so much fun. I mean, so it really was a fun time. And every single morning I would say, I'm so happy, I'm so excited. And I'd get on the train from Long Island, because that's where I was staying. So Long Island, and it was like a 40-minute train ride, which normally would be a pain, but it wasn't, because I was like either journaling or reading or meditating during that time. I was like, this is my sacred time and it's fun. And I really enjoyed my whole time. Things that used to bother me, I just kind of shifted in my mind and made it more fun. And around that time, that's when I met my husband. So a month before I met him, I wrote down a whole list. And you have to do this. This is the key, is that you have to convince yourself, regardless if you believe it or not. Don't let your like disbelief initially deter you, because you're going to have to keep saying it in your mind for
Yeah.
it to get in there. So you have to also say it as if it already happened. So it's not some future event, because if you're saying it's a future event, you are affirming that you don't have it now.
Yeah, it's like I
So
am or I have. So interesting. I don't know. I haven't read that book, the Joseph Murphy one, but I'm gonna get it. But I think I read something before I met my husband. And I had been like a no dating, like dry period. I had been living with monks. So I was like, there was like
right.
the monks I lived with were like, Christina, you should just become one of us because like it's over for you. Like there's no
Leave
one.
that head.
And and then I remember writing down on like a little post-it note the qualities of my husband. Now, in retrospect, I wish I had made a more intensive list of all the qualities, like picks up his socks and puts them in the hamper, whatever. But I made the list, and it was similar to you. Like very soon after, there he was. And so I have found, the sort of law of attraction or the powers of manifesting through affirmation to be just magical. And not just that, but I also find that it makes you happier. Like to recite these affirmations or a mantra, or to, be thinking about, what you want in that moment, and like, living as if it already is. Like you have this sense of joy and ease instead of like a longing. Uh,
Yes.
so that being the case, like, so for our ladies listening and wanting a baby and it being so hard and having that deep longing, what's some of the wisdom that you impart on them, or some practices that you would say, here's what you can do to shift from this fear-based mindset to, a state of light where you feel like you this is coming to you. It's there already. It's just, it hasn't landed.
So I'm big on the whole state of non-resistance. I really believe in that. And that includes when you are in times of where you feel darkness in your life, or times where you're feeling pain.
Mhm.
Allow it. Like, don't fight it. Don't say, I'm going to stop feeling like this, I'm going to go to this, because allowing it allows that energy and the emotions to flow the way they want to flow and to work themselves out. Because as we know, everything works itself out if it's allowed to,
Mhm.
because that is how we're designed. That's how the yin and yang, just they want to flow. We have this homeostasis in our body. Everything goes back to that if it's unimpeded. And then number two is, you can, even if your mind is very resistant and you're finding that you're almost too resistant to jump into affirmations, you can do this little trick. I remember hearing this online before, where you tell yourself, I allow myself to pick up this mug, and then you pick up a mug. I allow myself to turn off the switch, and then you turn off the switch. So then you're telling your mind, basically, every time I say that, I'm doing it. And then you can say, I allow myself to feel peace. You
Mm.
can follow that. So your mind will start to understand a pattern, and then you end it with something that you want to bring in. And it doesn't have to be drastic, it could be something small, until your mind gets more on board with it. But repetition is how we change habit. Awareness is how we find what's going on. We can actually get more clear on what is it that you're repeating to yourself daily. Or you can even do a gratitude journal, or just a gratitude practice. Like, you get somebody brings you, like, makes you a tea. That's just one example. You're like, oh my God, I'm so grateful for this little thing. Or you see a really pretty bird, or something simple. Like, look at the simple things that you have. And then the more you do that, the more your attention is going to go towards that. And that will give you more personal energy. And when you have personal energy, then you're able to make more effective changes in your life.
Yeah, because a lot of the fertility journey, like people just get emotionally and physically so battered and exhausted. And it's
Mhm.
like there's no space left to, think more positively or introduce affirmations. Like they're just so beat down.
Exactly.
And practices like these can start to, you're right, like shift and lighten the load, right? But I think that even if you don't believe it yet, you just have to keep saying it. Uh,
Yes.
I had this 22-year-old that used to work for me in my office in the early days when I was getting it started, and everything was so stressful, and there were always things going wrong. And And I was just so stressed all the time. And she would just keep saying, Christina, it's going to be fine. It's fine. It's fine. And so I started saying, it's fine. I'm fine. It's all fine. And then I
Yeah.
started believing it. It brought my stress level down so much. So then I tell my patients, I'm like, you have to tell yourself you're enough.
Yeah.
That this is not a failure, because it does work out. It doesn't feel like it's going to work out, but it does.
It does. It really does. And it actually reminds me, there was a time where I was like, I remember specifically being so overtired. I just wasn't sleeping and so much going on just because we were moving. And I remember like a time mentally feeling like just fear-based thoughts would just kind of creep up in my mind. And I was in New York during 9/11. I don't know if you were as well. I definitely feel like I had PTSD. So sometimes I'll have like fearful thoughts. And I remember catching myself like, having that. And then I just realized it's just a perception. But that was like a big aha for me, like in that moment, because a lot of times those fears will come out when you are exhausted, when you're tired, and you're depleted. And something else that I want to mention is that,
Or if you've had too much sugar, or if you've had alcohol, or
yeah,
you know what I mean, or, like there's like things that change under certain medications, like they change our thoughts. So I always tell people,
totally, the hormones.
exactly, I'm like, you can't trust your thoughts.
Yes,
Your thoughts change as your physiology changes. Like you say, if you're tired or if you have these other influences. So like we're asking our listeners to grasp a rather abstract concept, essentially, is that you are not your mind. Your thoughts are not real.
yeah.
They're basically like kind of a chatterbox in your
It's just
head.
something you carry. It's funny because I had like this thought, I'm not my thoughts. They're just something I carry. You don't
Yeah.
have to carry them. You could
Mhm.
you could drop them anytime, like, and move on to something else. It's a choice more than people initially realize, because we don't really understand our inner terrain as much as we do our outer world.
Yeah, the idea that it's a choice, I think, is a really hard thing to grasp sometimes, because the feeling associated with the thought, like there's the thought and that incites a feeling and it feels very real. Like
Mhm.
that fear, that anxiety, that pain feels very, very real. And then you get in touch with these thought patterns. I'm broken, I'm infertile, like
Mhm.
I'm failing, I'm like, even just like saying a failed IVF cycle, right? It's like the notion that you're failing at something, right?
Mhm.
And I always say, like, what's a different way to look at it? Oh, maybe your body's healing. It's not quite ready yet. You're on your path. You're going to be in a great place, so that this is going to be a healthy pregnancy. You're going to be ready to do this. What are some of the things that you say, or some visualizations that you would give to people to help them through this?
Yeah. So something that I do almost every time people come in for acupuncture, I tell them, like, while they're there, if they eventually want to fall asleep, fall asleep. But if you have a little time in the beginning, you could start visualizing, and you can imagine. Well, first, we know that the heart and the uterus have a connection. They literally have a vessel that connects the two. And we can use that energy thinking about something that we love, something that really brings us warmth in our heart, and bringing that energy down to the uterus. And then we can also imagine blood flow and white light that's intelligent. Imagine it however you want. It doesn't have to be a perfect imagination of what exactly happens biologically. You can also imagine light. You can imagine symbols to give yourself that energy, like the thought or the feeling of vitality in that womb center. So, womb, including not only the uterus, but the ovaries as well. One woman that was coming to me for a year randomly, it was after COVID, I like closed down for 2 months and then I started again. And she came back, and that that time, it was right around ovulation, or it might have been like before, after, like right around her ovulation, if not the day of ovulation. I specifically remember this. And she just felt a calling to talk to her baby. She knew it was a girl. She already had two babies. She suffered from secondary infertility, although I don't like the I word. I say infertility just because that was the diagnosis that was given to her.
Hmm.
But she just felt a calling to talk to her daughter and say, we're ready for you. We love you. And that month she was pregnant.
Oh my
She has
gosh.
a girl.
Yeah. It's interesting because I tell people like it's great that we have science to help us, but having a baby is a very spiritual, esoteric endeavor. And
Yeah.
I believe that there is a soul waiting to come. And there's these great meditations by Bella Ruth Naparstek
Hmm.
that you can download from iTunes. I play them for my patients in their
Hmm.
session, but it's basically like like saying things like, I know there's a soul waiting to come to me. And so, we want to make that invitation. We don't want to tell them that we're, freaking out and it's all chaos and everything's terrible and we feel toxic from all the cycles and whatever. We want to tell this sweet soul that we're ready and we can't wait to meet her or him. And that this is a healthy body and, like all of those things. I'm sure the affirmation lady says it better than me, but this idea of the invitation and it being like a spiritual kind of journey where we're connecting with another soul can be helpful.
100%. I think actually, if you are truly scientific, it's always going to lead you to the conclusion that there is some intelligence at play. I mean, it just, if you are truly non-biased, scientific, you will, because what gives us life? What makes us move? I mean, there's got to be something else. Like there's an intelligence, there's a design. We are designed so beautifully.
Mhm.
What is that intelligence? Is it just, it can't be random because it's not random.
No, I mean, it seems like very purposeful and very elegant design. So on the topic of science, you were mentioning offline that there is research to support visualization, for example. What did you find?
Okay, so they had a group of athletes that did, I think it's long range. I don't remember the exact word for it, but it's like long range basketball, like basically from far away, you get the hoop, you get the basketball in the hoop.
Mhm.
So they took three groups. Okay. So the first group is just the control group. They do nothing for a month, like zero, no practicing, no visualization, nothing. The second group practices for 30 minutes a day physically, and that's all they do. The third group imagines themselves practicing for 30 minutes a day, and that's all they do for a month. So at the end, the control group that did nothing really benefited by none. They didn't get better at all. The second group, which practiced every day, I believe, and don't quote me on the exact percentage, but it's about 30%. So they were 30% better than the first group. And then the third group, which is just imagined, did not practice or do anything physical, which you would think, especially when it comes to anything that is physical, you'd have to practice because you'd also be working on your strength and every coordination, everything. All they did was visualize. And I believe it was like they were like about 27 to 29% better than the the control group, which means that there were only about like 1 to 2% difference between the visualization versus the actual practice.
That's amazing. I remember reading stuff about Olympic swimmers and other Olympic athletes doing visualizations. And I remember doing it for martial arts and for yoga. Like I remember, and it's also because I loved it so much. I remember like, just like, if I wasn't in a Tai Chi or Kung Fu class, or if I wasn't in a yoga class or practicing yoga, I would literally be sitting thinking about rolling through the sequences. And then by the time I would get back to the mat or back to the class the following week, I was better. Like I had processed that practice in my mind and understood the movements better and had actually improved. And I remember really crediting that to the visualization. Um, and so for your patients that are, struggling with the I word or, having these fertility challenges, what do you find are some of the most helpful visualizations that you'd recommend?
So definitely what I was saying before is just really you could do a lot of heart visualizations because especially when you're struggling, it impacts your anxiety. As we know, the heart is very much connected to that, and the heart houses the mind. So you really do want to put a lot of energy into the heart. Sometimes I have people put one hand on the heart, one hand on the womb, and just kind of breathe in and out and start to feel their breath in both centers. So give themselves a few minutes there. And then sometimes I'll have them imagine holding like even a pet or cuddling with their spouse or something that like brings that warm and loving feeling, that warm and fuzzy love, that you have in your heart. and and cultivating that, really putting a lot of energy towards that love. So love for yourself and love for others. I talk about the meditation a lot, which is the loving kindness. So feeling it, visualizing it, and then funneling it down into the uterus and saying I love you and accept you. So you could say it also audibly in your mind as you're visualizing. I love and accept you for exactly where you are.
Mm.
I love and support you. And I'll tell you something, that is like the beginning of parenting right there.
Totally. So it's like, I believe in my potential, my reproductive potential, my fertility. I believe in that. I love myself. It sounds hokey in a way. Like I remember I went to this event in Central Park this weekend and it was like affirmation drawings. And it was like, I am enough. I am important. And you could, as a cynical person, you could scoff and be like, oh, whatever. But as you mentioned at the beginning of this session, the more you say it, the more true it becomes. And so, in this discussion,
Yes.
we're sort of highlighting what you say to yourself is your truth. Where can our listeners find you? You're amazing.
Oh, thank you so much. And I feel the same way, Dr. Christina. So they could reach me. The easiest is www.michelleoravitz.com, or on Instagram, it's at the Wholesome Lotus Fertility. And I also have a podcast that Dr. Christina Burns was on, and it is the Wholesome Fertility Podcast.
Amazing. I suggest everybody tune in for mindfulness and wisdom. It's so great to have discussions like this and just know that there's some kind of power that we can take back over the experience that we're having, and hopefully also to quicken the path to our destination, our desired destination.
No
So
doubt.
thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.